always loved the quiet solitude of her new countryside home. The isolation was perfect for her writing, and the rolling hills outside her window provided endless inspiration. Yet, as autumn settled in, the long nights grew colder, and an unsettling feeling began to creep into the house. It started with small things, shifting on shelves, doors creaking open on their own. Mira dismissed these as tricks of the mind, a writer's imagination running wild. But then she began to hear the footsteps. Late at night, just as she was drifting off to sleep, the sound would echo through the empty hallway. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone were pacing back and forth. Mira would lie still in her bed, her heart pounding, telling herself it was just the house settling, the old wood expanding and contracting in the cold. But one night, the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer. The air in her bedroom turned icy, her breath visible in the dim light. The creaking of the floorboards was right outside her door now. She pulled the covers over her head, clutching them tight, every nerve in her body screaming to run, to flee. But she was frozen in place. The door to her bedroom creaked open, though she knew she had locked it. A faint shadow fell across the room, and Mira could feel the presence. Something was in the room with her, watching her. Slowly, she peeked out from beneath the covers, her eyes straining in the darkness. There, standing at the foot of her bed, was a figure, a man, tall and gaunt, his face hidden in shadow. His clothes were tattered, and his eyes, hollow and black, stared into hers. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, an ominous silhouette against the night. Mira couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. The figure began to move, slowly, around the side of the bed, close to where she lay, paralyzed with fear. As he reached out a bony hand toward her, she finally found the strength to move. With a burst of terror, she lunged for the light switch beside her bed. The room flooded with light, and the figure vanished, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his footsteps retreating down the hall. Mira sat up, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The house was silent once more, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The next morning, she packed her things and left the house for good, never looking back. But sometimes, late at night, in the safety of her new apartment, she still hears those footsteps in the hallway, growing louder, closer, until she can't bear it any longer, and turns on every light in the room. And every time the footsteps stop, but the fear remains, the sense that something or someone followed her and is still waiting in the shadows. Her couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In her new apartment, the cold, creeping dread that had haunted her in the countryside followed her like a shadow. No matter how many lights she turned on, how many locks she bolted, the fear remained, an ever-present companion in the dark hours of the night. She tried to convince herself it was all in her head. But every night, just as she was about to drift off, she would hear it again. The slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hallway outside her bedroom. The sound was the same, no matter where she moved, no matter how many miles she put between herself and that old house. Mira's sleep became restless, plagued by nightmares. She dreamt of the figure, standing at the foot of her bed, its hollow eyes staring into her soul. She could never see its face clearly, but she knew it was the same man, the same presence that had terrorized the countryside. One evening, exhausted and desperate for answers, she reached out to a paranormal investigator. His name was Ethan, a man in his late 30s with an air of quiet confidence. When he arrived at her apartment, his demeanor was calm and professional, though his eyes held a seriousness that told Mira he had seen things beyond ordinary understanding. After hearing her story, Ethan set up his equipment: EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and digital recorders. He moved through the apartment, asking questions to the empty air, as if expecting a response. The apartment remained eerily silent, the tension thick in the air. Hours passed with no activity. Mira began to feel foolish, as if she had imagined everything. Maybe she had just been too stressed, too isolated in that old house. But just as she was about to give up, the footsteps started again. They were louder this time, more insistent, as if whatever was in the apartment wanted her to know it was there. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, their breath visible in the air. Ethan's equipment began to spike, lights flashing, alarms beeping, and then they heard it, a low, guttural whisper coming from the shadows of the hallway. "Get out!" Mira's blood ran cold. The voice was barely human, more of a growl than words. Ethan remained calm, but she could see the tension in his posture. He motioned for her to stay behind him as he slowly approached the source of the sound. As he reached the hallway, the temperature plummeted further. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness growing thicker, almost tangible. Ethan raised his thermal camera, and through the lens, Mira saw it. A figure, barely more than a shadow, standing at the far end of the hallway. It was the same man from her nightmares, his eyes hollow, his form flickering in and out of focus. Ethan began to speak, his voice firm yet calm, addressing the figure directly. "You do not belong here. You must leave this place." The figure did not move, but the air around them grew heavier, pressing down on Mira's chest, making it hard to breathe. Ethan continued to speak, his voice unwavering. "This is not your home. You need to move on. There is nothing for you here." The figure's outline grew sharper, more defined, and Mira could see its face now, a pale, twisted visage, filled with anger and sorrow. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. It took a step forward, and Mira felt a surge of fear so intense it almost knocked her to her knees. But Ethan stood his ground, raising a hand as if to block the figure's path. "You will not harm her. You will leave this place." The figure hesitated, its form wavering. The air seemed to tremble, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. For a moment, Mira thought it might actually work, that the thing might leave her alone. But then the figure lunged, it shifting into a mass of shadow that rushed toward them. Mira screamed, her terror breaking through her paralysis. Ethan stepped forward, his hand still raised, and shouted a word Mira couldn't understand. The shadow recoiled, as if struck, and with a final ear-splitting wail, it dissipated into the air, leaving behind only a suffocating silence. Mira collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her body shaking uncontrollably. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, reassuring her with his calm presence. "It's over," he said softly. "It's gone." But Mira knew better. The presence might be gone, but the fear, the memory, would stay with her forever. She would never forget the hollow eyes, the feeling of being watched, the icy breath on her skin. As Ethan helped her to her feet, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the first night. Why did it follow me? What did it want? Ethan hesitated, his expression grave. Some spirits are bound to a person, not a place. It might have seen something in you, something that reminded it of what it once had, or lost. Or maybe it just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. Mira nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. But one thing was clear. She could never go back to the way things were. She would have to live with the knowledge that the world was not as she had once believed, that there were things in the shadows, watching, waiting. As Ethan packed up his equipment and prepared to leave, he gave her a final piece of advice. Keep the lights on at night, and don't let the fear take hold. It's the fear that gives them power. Remember, you're stronger than you think. Mira nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. But as the door closed behind him and she was left alone in the apartment, she took a deep breath, flicked on every light in the room, and sat down at her desk. For the first time in weeks, she opened her laptop and began to write. The words flowed easily, the fear slowly giving way to a new kind of strength. She might never escape the shadows completely, but she could face them, confront them head on. And that, she realized, was the only way to truly move on.
Thanks for watching.